Did you know that Universal Pictures spent a staggering $400 million just to acquire the rights to make a new Exorcist trilogy? Or that director David Gordon Green, fresh off his Halloween trilogy, confidently claimed that would be the most ambitious horror film he'd ever made? What about the fact that despite bringing back Ellen Burstyn from the original 1973 classic, she's barely in the film, disappearing entirely from the climactic exorcism scene? And perhaps most damning of all, in a franchise known for its genuine terror, the film currently sits at a dismal 22% on Rotten Tomatoes, with critics calling it soulless, uninspired, and a grotesque misfire. When news broke that a direct sequel to one of the most influential horror films of all time was in development, expectations ran unsurprisingly high. With Blumhouse's involvement and the director who successfully revitalized the Halloween franchise at the helm, the Exorcist believer appeared poised to resurrect this dormant horror icon for a new generation. So, how did such a promising project with a massive budget, returning stars, and an established creative team result in what many call the biggest horror disappointment of 2023? Before we break down exactly where this anticipated revival went so disastrously wrong, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and ring the notification bell to catch all our deep dives into cinema's greatest disappointments. Reason number 1. Theological confusion. The most important factor in The Exorcist believer's failure is its fundamental misunderstanding of what made the 1973 original film powerful: the theological backbone. William Friedkin's original masterpiece, based on William Peter Blatty's novel, wasn't just a horror film. It was a deeply Catholic meditation on faith, doubt, and redemption. Father Karras' crisis of faith formed the emotional and spiritual core of the narrative, culminating in his sacrificial act that saved Reagan's soul. The original film asserted something profound: if the devil exists, then God must exist too. This theological certainty gave the original harrowing power. By contrast, Believer replaces the theological clarity with a muddled, all paths lead to the same place approach. The film assembles a multi-faith council for its exorcism, including a Catholic priest, Pentecostal preacher, Baptist pastor, and rootwork healer, but fails to develop any coherent spiritual framework. As critic Joseph Holmes noted, the film tries to update itself by replacing concrete faith with vague notions of community, with Chris McNeil even describing religious rituals as essentially placebos. The result is an exorcism without any conviction, where the demon Lamashtu remains essentially undefeated. When Burstyn's character tells the protagonist, "Yes, we all gather to affirm our faith in God, but we also gather to affirm our faith in each other," it reveals the film's fundamental misunderstanding of what made the original terrifying: the idea that some evils can only be combated through genuine spiritual faith, not just human connection. Reason number 2. Squandered Legacy. The Exorcist believer commits the cardinal sin of legacy sequels, bringing back beloved characters only to waste them entirely. Ellen Burstyn's return as Chris McNeil was the film's biggest selling point, promising to bridge the gap between the original masterpiece and this new chapter. Having declined to appear in any previous sequels, her involvement suggested something special about this project. In reality, her role is criminally underdeveloped. After a promisingly emotional reunion with a grown-up Reagan early in the film, Chris is established as someone who's spent decades researching exorcisms worldwide. Even worse is the treatment of Linda Blair's Reagan, who only appears after the exorcism is complete in what amounts to a little more than a glorified cameo. Instead of using these characters in meaningful ways that might honor or expand upon their legacy, the film treats them as mere nostalgia bait to lure in fans of the original. This approach shares concerning similarities with David Gordon Green's Halloween Ends, which sidelined Jamie Lee Curtis's Laurie Strode for much of its runtime. In both cases, the returning legacy characters feel more like marketing tools than essential elements of the narrative, leaving fans feeling cheated of the promised passing of the torch that these films seemed to address. Reason number 3. Ineffective Horror. For a franchise built on delivering some of the most disturbing and memorable horror imagery in cinema history, The Exorcist believer is shockingly tame and reliant on tired tropes. The 1973 Exorcist remains legendary for its visceral, boundary-pushing horror. The infamous spider walk scene, Reagan's head spinning, and the crucifix desecration are seared into our cultural consciousness because they combine practical effects with psychological horror that felt genuinely transgressive. In stark contrast, Believer relies heavily on predictable jump scares, CGI enhancements, and horror cliches that feel recycled from countless lesser possession films that have emerged since the original. The possessed children, Angela and Catherine, never achieve the terrifying presence of Linda Blair's Regan, partly because their transformations feel rushed and lack the methodical build-up that made the original work. Critics and audiences have particularly noted how the film's R rating feels kind of wasted, with many of the more intense moments feeling sanitized compared to the original's delivery 5 decades ago. Reason number 4. Bloated narrative. The Exorcist Believer suffers from trying to juggle too many characters and subplots without giving sufficient depth to any of them. Where the original film maintained a laser focus on Regan, her mother, and the 2 priests, Believer spreads itself thin across multiple families, religious figures, and supernatural elements. The film begins with Victor Fielding, Leslie Odom Jr., losing his pregnant wife in Haiti, and then jumps forward to his life raising their daughter Angela. When Angela and her friend Catherine go missing and return possessed, the film introduces Catherine's religious mother, various doctors, multiple religious leaders, and community members. This overcrowded approach prevents the audience from forming deep connections with any of the characters. The relationship between Victor and Angela never achieves the emotional resonance of Chris and Regan's bond in the original. Similarly, the possessed girls remain underdeveloped, with the film failing to establish their personalities before the possession, making it difficult for viewers to feel the tragedy of their situation. The narrative also introduces multiple subplots that are unmeaningful. Victor's crisis of faith following his wife's death, tensions between Catherine's religious family and Angela's atheist father, and Chris MacNeil's decades of research into exorcisms across the globe. None of these threads receive adequate development or satisfying resolution, resulting in a film that feels simultaneously overstuffed and hollow. Reason number 5. Predictable structure. The Exorcist Believer follows the David Gordon Green reboot formula a little too closely, resulting in a film that feels more like a corporate product than a creative vision. After successfully revitalizing the Halloween franchise with his 2018 reboot, Green brings the exact same template to The Exorcist, but with diminishing returns. The formula, returning legacy characters meet new protagonists to battle a familiar evil, worked once, but now feels calculated and predictable. Even the marketing strategy mirrored the Halloween approach, heavily emphasizing Burstyn's return just as the 2018 film centered on Jamie Lee Curtis coming back as Laurie Strode. The problem is that The Exorcist is not Halloween, and applying the same template to a fundamentally different type of horror film results in a movie that feels inauthentic to the source material. The film's structure proceeds almost beat for beat through the possession movie checklist: strange behavior, medical examinations that find nothing wrong, escalating supernatural incidents, consulting religious authorities, and finally, the exorcism itself. At no point does the film subvert these expectations or offer a fresh perspective on the familiar formula. Reason number 6. Demonic misfire. Perhaps the most fundamental failure of The Exorcist Believer is its inability to create a compelling demonic antagonist worthy of the franchise. The original film's demon, Pazuzu, remains one of cinema's most terrifying villains, intelligent, sadistic, and genuinely evil. Through Regan, Pazuzu demonstrated intimate knowledge of characters' darkest secrets, played psychological games, and created a sense that humanity was facing something truly ancient and malevolent. Believer introduces a new demon, Lamashtu, but fails to develop this entity into anything particularly memorable or distinct. The film tells us Lamashtu is dangerous rather than showing us through uniquely disturbing demonstrations of power. When the demon does speak through the possessed girls, the dialogue lacks the chilling impact of Pazuzu's interactions with Father Merrin and Father Karras. Most problematically, the film makes Lamashtu too powerful without establishing clear rules or limitations. The demon essentially wins, killing Father Maddox instantly and forcing parents to choose which child dies, while none of the religious figures can do anything to stop it. Reason number 7. Underwhelming climax. The culmination of all these problems converges in The Exorcist Believer's deeply unsatisfying finale, which betrays both the film's supposed themes and the franchise legacy. After assembling its interfaith council for the climactic exorcism, the film delivers a sequence that feels both predictable and nihilistic. When Lamashtu forces the parents to choose which child will survive, the film makes the obvious choice, sacrificing the supporting character's daughter rather than our protagonists. This predictable decision undercuts any genuine suspense. More problematically, the demon essentially gets exactly what it wants. Rather than being defeated through faith, sacrifice, or clever scriptural knowledge, as in the original, Lamashtu simply decides its work is done after claiming Catherine's life. This ending fundamentally undermines the film's supposed message about the power of interfaith cooperation, as their combined efforts accomplish virtually nothing against the demonic force. The brief appearance of Linda Blair as a grown-up Reagan in the aftermath feels like too little too late, a nostalgic moment that arrives after all the important action has concluded, rather than using Reagan's unique perspective as someone who survived a possession. The film relegates her to a glorified cameo that adds nothing substantial to the narrative. But hey, that's just our opinion. What did you think? Could this franchise still be saved with a different approach in the upcoming The Exorcist Deceiver? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more deep dives into cinema's greatest disappointments. This video is made by movie fans, for movie fans.